Welcome, everyone. My name is Chris Poulin, and I'm a security strategist for IBM Security Systems. I am actually the former Chief Security Officer of Q1 Labs, which was acquired by IBM a couple of years ago, and I'm proud to present this webinar for Intigrow. And what we'll be talking about today is protecting mobile communications with security intelligence, and I will define that as we go along here. But first, let me set the stage for you. So today, we have a far more complicated infrastructure than we had 10 years ago, and protecting it is a lot more difficult. So we're used to the typical people problem where we've got employees, we've got outsourcers, and things we have to worry about. But now we also have to worry about hackers and hacktivists. So they're actually evolving. I'll talk about how the people themselves are evolving here in a moment. But the data itself is evolving as well. So we're used to structured data like databases, things like that. But now social media has entered the fray, and we have to worry about unstructured data, people tweeting and posting on Facebook and LinkedIn and things like that. The applications themselves are getting more complicated. You know, we're used to applications off-the-shelf packages that we run on servers and web applications. We're fine with those. But now mobile applications are entering the mix as well. And the infrastructure itself is changing to accommodate that, right? So we're used to servers and laptops, but now we've got mobile devices. We've got cloud infrastructure. We've got the Internet of Things, so DVRs and toasters are being connected to our environment. Hopefully your business is not monitoring people's toasters, but that could be a good business opportunity. And then one of my favorites is cars. So cars have, at the last count, about 100 million lines of code for a luxury vehicle and about 100 electronic control units per car. There's also WiMAX and OnStar and Bluetooth, and they're being connected all over the place, not just to the consumer, so you can stream your iPhone music to the dashboard, but also to the auto manufacturers so that they can track the location of the vehicles, look at the status, and try to predict when the tire is going to pop or whatever. And so, effectively, a car is now a rolling network, and it is just as subject to hacking as anything else. And in fact, at this past year, 2013, the DEF CON conference, a couple of researchers presented their findings on how to hack a car and turn on the brakes, turn off the engine, do all kinds of devious and bad things to cars as they're rolling along. So what this really means is that there is not a perimeter anymore. We don't think of it as being our soft, chewy inside with a hard, crunchy outside. Now there are basically multiple perimeters with multiple things that, multiple levels of protection that need to be provided for. So it's not just the infrastructure, it's also the attackers themselves. So when we think about what happened about 10, 15 years ago, it was virus writers who did it for bragging rights. Hey, I got on the news because my virus infected 100,000 computers, you know, and then the next guy is going to try to one-up them with 150,000 computers or whatever it is. So all of that was sort of bespoke or custom code, but to be honest with you, a lot of it was sort of packaged anyway. They're using off-the-shelf tools and techniques. And the same is true with what we think of as script kiddies. Now there's far more sophisticated code out there that may be targeted specifically at an organization, right? So, you know, we've gone from, if you look at the top left of the slide, to, again, script kiddies, and then even financially motivated attacks against, for example, banks. So being able to steal credentials or just denial of service to banks because of hacktivism may use fairly simple tools, or at least tools that are canned. And then we look at sophisticated code out there. There's actually nation states that are waging cyber war against a broader base, you know, so one nation against another. Or it could be some crew of hackers that may be sponsored by a nation state, maybe they're doing it on their own, who might be targeting your organization for financial gain, maybe to steal your intellectual property or to steal your data, or even perhaps to delete data. So it turns out that the attacker ecosystem is a little bit more complicated than it has been. And it may be financially motivated, maybe politically motivated. There's also, not to forget, there's also insiders themselves. So it's what I like to call the quantum problem, which is when you think about quantum physics, it states that anything that something is in a particular state, but it can't be known until you measure it. And that is true also of your insiders, right? So you don't know who's trying to steal your data, who's acting with malicious intent, someone who you purportedly trust. But also remember that one of the ways that attackers can gain access to your data is they break into your environment and effectively become insiders themselves. Unwanted, granted, but still insiders before they can actually exfiltrate data. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in terms of what security intelligence can provide for detecting these insiders, whether they're your own employees or someone from the outside. So speaking of security intelligence, let's throw a definition around that. So what is this thing that we're talking about? So security intelligence is effectively what we think of as analysis. So it is effectively the real-time collection, normalization, and analytics of data generated by users, applications, and infrastructure. So what it really means is that we're going to collect everything under the sun that's producing some sort of log, what we think of as big data. But we also define it in terms of a how. So a complete approach to defending critical assets, intellectual property, and private data using advanced knowledge detection. So we'll dig into that a little bit more as we go through, but effectively what we're doing is delivering actionable and comprehensive insight so that you can manage risks and you can repel threats. And that is going to occur from the point of detection all the way through mediation. So with that, let's take a look. Let's talk about first about what security intelligence and business intelligence have in common. So they are sort of parallel, to put a little bit more color around this. So about 10, 15 years ago, analysts were talking about business intelligence to be able to optimize businesses, so gathering data and analyzing it and finding out how you can better do business, both from an operational efficiency perspective and also from a customer satisfaction perspective. And as you can see, if you look around at any business now, they rely on analytics and business intelligence. And so security intelligence is basically the same thing. It's taking a bunch of data, and its aim is to be able to detect where risks are and threats are and nip them in the bud effectively. So make your operation run more effectively by not having to be subject to threats. And also, you can also use security intelligence to better predict and enable business. So enter markets that you may not have been able to enter before, because now you have the protection of analytics from an IT risk perspective. And in fact, these two things sort of converge at some point, because IT risk feeds into operational risk, and operational risk is what the business runs on. It's how the board of directors makes decisions. Right. So let's talk about the security intelligence timeline for a second. So one of the aims here is to be able to arrest the kill chain is one of the things that people talk about. And what that means is that the attackers have a certain timeline. So they're going to profile your environment, they're going to determine what their targets are, they're going to weaponize some code, whether it's off the shelf or whether they write something specific like Stuxnet. They're going to exploit you, they're going to elevate their privileges, and then finally exfiltrate data or delete data, whatever it is that they're going to be doing. So us as the defenders, what we need to be able to do is determine where our vulnerabilities are. So that's the pre-exploit stage. But also be able to have a sense of what the external and internal threats are. What are the bad actors doing now, both from an external threat perspective as well as our insiders. And then we need to configure ourselves to protect against those threats that we've already identified, plus hopefully a little broader protection so that we can repel things that we haven't yet thought of, that only the bad guys are concocting at the moment. Then here comes the exploit phase, right? So we know that no matter how much we protect ourselves, an exploit is likely to happen, whether it's minor or major. And so the ability to be able to determine what's happening right now is what security intelligence is also about. It's part of it is determining where vulnerabilities are before an exploit, but then also being able to detect when we're being exploited. Again, hopefully early enough in the stage that we can stop it before we actually suffer any consequential damages. So the ability to see what's happening right now, and then we need to also determine the impact, because we may detect that somebody's been hacking us or poking at our defenses, but have they actually stolen any data? If they have, was it customer data? If it was customer data, we may need to know how much customer data it was. So for example, HIPAA, if 499 patient records are stolen, then you do not have to notify your customers of that, although you probably should, just because it's good practice. But technically, in HIPAA, it's under 500 records. You don't have to. After 500 records, you do. And then let's say they stole records, but not the data that actually is electronic protected health information or personally identifiable information, right? So it's not actually addresses and phone numbers and social security numbers. Then that's a different consequence than simply somebody breaking in and stealing a bunch of names. So there's a bunch of technology that we can throw at the problem here, and we're going to specifically be talking about security intelligence in a moment. But just so you see what we've got in our defensive arsenal, risk management, vulnerability management, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got a bunch of tools. And in fact, when we start looking at how we protect infrastructure and data, at IBM we break it down into effectively 4 buckets. We're looking at security technology that protects people, the technology that protects data, applications, and infrastructure. All of this is underpinned by our advanced security and threat research, what we call our X-Force security research team. And so all of that feeds into all of our products. And then layered on top of it is our security, intelligence, and analytics. So all of the security technology also feeds their logs or events up into the analytics layer. So the whole thing comprises a complete solution to help protect your environment. And so let's dig a little bit into the security intelligence, how it actually works perspective. We like to call this finding the needle, and not in a haystack, but in a stack of needles, right? Because it's not that hard to find a needle in a haystack. In fact, if you watch Mythbusters, they actually did that one time. So you could get a big old magnet and just run it over the haystack, and straw stays and the needle comes, right? So you could do that. So we like to think of it as finding a needle in a stack of needles. So the first part is to just take in all the telemetry from everything in your entire organization. So we know about security devices, firewalls, IDS, IPSs, antivirus logs, and things like that. That's pretty traditional from a log management perspective, as well as servers and hosts, so your Windows infrastructure, Unix boxes. But also to be able to take in vulnerability information. I talked a second ago about being able to look at your assets and what vulnerabilities exist, and this is one of the ways you can do it. So you can enrich your logs for servers and hosts with vulnerability, and I'll talk about a use case about that in a second. Not to be left out here is network information. So, and we'll talk about that as well as your virtual machines. Users, of course, because we want to track it all the way down to the user layer. Being able to track things in databases, specific applications are really useful for certain use cases. And of course, configuration management is critical as well. So we're going to drag all this stuff into a central repository, what we think of as big data. And then we can also apply context to it, like IP reputation, geolocation, and we can start to use all this information, including information from our threat research, to reduce the data down to something manageable. So it turns out that a lot of times when we think of the SIM, security information and event management, there is sort of a bad reputation of being difficult to tune and actually get any useful information. And in fact, first generation SIMs were difficult to enable. And so what would end up happening is that you'd get a bunch of what we think of as suspected incidents that you'd have to fix some investigators on, right? Some human bodies on there to figure out what's happening. But the real goal here is to hone in on those things that are important and relevant and that are true offenses, that when you invest in human capital to go investigate those things, that you're fairly sure that there is a reason for using their time, right? Because again, you don't want to have to staff up with hundreds of investigators when you're really only investigating 10 real incidents per day or something like that. So what we're basically saying is take in as much data as you can, provide some deep intelligence, and you actually get out of this exceptionally accurate and actionable insight. So let's talk a little bit about the product itself. So the foundation is Curator Log Manager, and it's a GUI-based solution. You can have dashboards, you get real-time visibility. There are out-of-the-box rules for certain policies and detecting certain threats like denial of services and botnets and things like that. And it allows you to do some pretty advanced but simple to use mining and drill down. And I'll show you a couple screens here in a second. It also gives you the ability to allow role-based access to the solution. So you may have your network team contributing network flows and maybe configuration information for your network infrastructure devices, and they can go look at that stuff, but maybe not your Windows Server events, and that might be relegated to the systems team who are contributing those events and can look at those. And then risk management may be able to look at everything and start to run rules across your entire infrastructure. So it truly is sort of a cloud-based, I hate to use the term, but I will, it's sort of a cloud-based way of looking at things. So it also, the next thing that you can use it for is to be able to exceed compliance requirements. This is the way I like to think of it, right? Most people by log management solutions because they have a compliance mandate they need to comply with. And that's sort of like taking a sledgehammer and using it as a rubber stamp for a check mark, right? So effectively, you're going to crush your desk in a paper that you're trying to stamp on anyway. So you've got all this extra weight in the solution that you can be leveraging to accomplish other things, to really affect better security in your organization. And you should be able to do it simply. So one of the things that we've done invested a lot of time and effort is to make it simple to use the solution. So you just point your log sources to our solution, and it automatically discovers them and starts to apply rules to them. You can actually collect logs from all over the place, from distributed environments. We have customers who have log collectors all over the world, and they come back to one central console. You can do fast text searches and just say, hey, I'm looking for this IP address across my entire global network. Just type it in, it comes back within seconds. Of course, we provide tamper-proof storage, and in fact, QRadar has been used for an investigation by a district attorney's office in the U.S., and that person was in fact convicted. Of course, we've got a bunch of compliance-driven report templates out of the box at no extra cost. And we also, the log management solution shares a common architecture with QRadar, the full-blown analysis package, which is our SIM package, so that you can upgrade with just a license. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that works here in a second. So, of course, we give you the ability to have dashboards, and they're, as I pointed out, that they're role-based. You can look at just about anything. You can create your own widgets. You have full workflow management so that you can assign different offenses to investigators and follow them through to completion. You can also connect it to an external ticket management system like Remedy. And we're scalable. In fact, we're so scalable, we have a customer who's running over 1 million events per second, that's about 86 billion plus, a little bit over 86 billion events per day. And we have the ability to collect logs from virtual deployments as well as run in a virtual environment. And of course, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but we've got compliance reports out of the box for many different things, and anything that's not available out of the box is fairly simple to create. So today we're really talking about mobile threats. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that the Cloud Security Alliance, they have a mobile working group, and they produced a report on October 4th of 2012. It contains the top concerns that risk management executives, or the top 5 mobile security concerns of risk management executives. And so I just boiled these down to 5 because the rest were a little bit more esoteric. But really what you see here is data loss from lost, stolen, or decommissioned devices, information stealing from mobile malware, et cetera, et cetera. What you'll find as you look through this list is that most of them deal with, or almost all of them deal with, data theft, one way or the other, whether it is the theft of information that resides on the mobile device or being able to leverage the mobile device access to your internal network to steal information from there. So we're going to talk about some use cases based upon that, and hopefully that'll be useful to you. So one of the reasons to use security intelligence is that we're really good at processing visual activity, right? So if you think about it, as we walk around and you meet lots of people during the day, assuming you have a job like mine, I recognize a lot of faces. I don't always remember the names, I'll admit that, and I think we all can probably raise our hands to that one. But we're really good at recognizing faces. I know that face. That person I think I met in Toronto 4 years ago or something like that. And so as a result, we're not really good at processing this big list of numbers. So looking at events and logs is not something that humans do effectively. So if we can visualize it, then we can do a much better job of visualizing or detecting patterns within this visual activity. So that's one of the things that a SIM should do, or a security intelligence solution should do. But also it should be able to correlate activity on its own, so to do a lot of the pre-processing that we're not really equipped to do as human beings. We've got great brains, but we're not computers by any stretch. And so as you can see here, there's lots and lots of information, and it's being boiled down to suspicious users, access violations. There's all kinds of things that you can create here from an offense perspective. And again, one of the reasons that you want to do this is to be able to detect this this activity, suspicious activity, before you suffer any data loss. And so here's an example. This is data that's being pulled into our QRadar solution, and what we're seeing here is the top 10 events, the top events by log type, excuse me. So the type being, of course, checkpoint firewall versus an IBM AIX server, et cetera, and the count of events. And you can sort this any way you want to. You could actually say, let's look at the by log type or by specific logs or by network segment. And instead of by count, you could say by number of bytes, by suspicious activity, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of ways you can slice and dice this. But my point here is this, that this is a spectacular way that you can get value out of security intelligence just by a couple mouse clicks. And that is to look at your top 10, because who knows what their environment looks like. When I talk to customers, a lot of times I'll ask them, what does your activity look like in your network environment or on your servers? Do you have a sense from a day-to-day perspective what it looks like? And because the reason is that if you don't know what the baseline is, what normal means, then how can you detect what an anomaly is? And most of them actually don't. In fact, when people raise their hand to tell me, I usually I walk into that conversation as a skeptic. So this is a great way for you to be able to look at what your top events are and start to get a sense of what's happening in your environment. You could also pivot by geography if you wanted to, something that's useful for a number of reasons. So a lot of times we're going to be looking, maybe we don't do business with Eastern Bloc countries, or maybe the Far East, or whatever, who knows. Or maybe we look at how often we have activity from certain geographies, and all of a sudden we see a spike in that. That can be an indicator of something suspicious. So you can quickly do the same sort of report, a couple mouse clicks and bang, get that pie chart, you can look at, or a bar chart. And if you don't like all these letters that spell out words are really tough. You can also have it show you the flags of the countries if you're a flagophile, whatever that real world is. So there's all kinds of ways to visualize data and to detect anomalous patterns. Of course, you can, there are dashboards, I already mentioned that you can customize per role and put different sorts of widgets on. And in fact, we have customers who run their security operations centers on our dashboards. And they've got different sort of dashboards for the analysts, for compliance, for risk management, and for executive management as well. So obviously, we've got that. And one of the things that differentiates in QRadar, and one of the things that allows us to effectively create some mobile use cases, is the fact that we not only take in events from systems, but we also take in network flow and do analytics. So if you think about what happens when somebody breaks into a system, the first thing that they're going to do is try to erase their tracks. So they're going to turn off logging, and then they're going to go back and try to prune out their own activity from the system logs. Anything they can, right? So hopefully in a system like this, you're sending logs off blocks, and so they can't go access those. So, but what they can't do is they can't turn off the network. If they shut the network off, they effectively shut themselves out as well. So too bad, so sad. So now we can watch them. And in fact, the other thing is that network activity gives us the ability to look in places where we may not be able to gather data. So if you think about some third-party apps or some legacy applications that don't give you the ability to collect logs from them. In fact, some of them don't even let you apply patches to them. If you're in, for example, healthcare or manufacturing, there's some old systems that are running DOS 2.1 or something like that. In order for you to gain access to what's happening on those systems to find out if they're breached, your only recourse is to be able to shine a light through the network activity. And in fact, we have two parts. We can either use your existing NetFlow capability, so you've got Cisco Juniper infrastructure that can produce NetFlow or JFlow records, and we can just ingest those. Those only go to level 4, right? So you only really get TCP and UDP port, as well as whether it was TCP or UDP, obviously. So you can look at that data. But we also have something called QFlow, which is effectively a sniffer which produces our own type of flow records that that goes all the way to layer 7. And in fact, it does a partial, and it could do a full packet capture if you wanted to, although you wouldn't want to do that because you're limited by space. So it can detect applications. So we'll show you that in a second, and you can also capture packets for later forensics. So NetFlow is critical for a number of reasons. And just as we used events to try to figure out what normal looks like from an event perspective, we can do the same thing but with flows. So you can see here that I'm looking at top 10 flows or top flows. It basically shows you all flows sorted by most used, by total bytes in this particular case. And what we see is data transfer, Windows file sharing. So of course, people are driving files around in Windows networks. That makes sense, particularly because we're looking at it for total bytes transferred. Now, the second thing you might notice on the slide is other. And I would dig into that deeply and find out what's going on. If you look at the third thing down, we find out that BitTorrent is running. And that is probably going to violate our corporate policy, one would hope anyway. So you probably want to go dig into that a little bit. Now, it's a lot of activity. We're looking at this by total bytes. So it could just be a few BitTorrent clients, but you should probably go shut them down. And Skype is number 4. Okay, it depends on whether that's part of your policy or not. But something to always remember is that sometimes the things that happen least often are the most important, right? So it could be that somebody's trying to exfiltrate data underneath your covers. So they're sending, they're already resident on your internal network, and they're going to send 100,000 bytes every, 2-3 hours, instead of trying to send off gigabytes of data all at once that they've stolen from your application development server or whatever it is. So looking at what happens least is also interesting. So at this particular example, and of course this is all test data or example data, what we see here is, we're looking at some of the bottom things. We see some Oracle data. Okay, that's not too bad, but if you look at the flag next to Oracle, and we haven't shown it out in the little call-out box here, but it's actually from China, which may be fun. We may have a relationship with China or an annex of our company in China, or we actually maybe housed in China. I don't know. But now we also see that VNC, so remote access, is being done from Korea. That may or may not be good, so it may be something you want to look at. So again, looking at things that happen infrequently are sometimes as useful for the top flows. So how can we leverage this to shore up our mobile security? So let's talk about a data model for mobile access here for a second. So typically what will end up happening is that mobile devices themselves will connect over the internet to a web portal that gives them access to our private network and data. So if we think about an auto manufacturer is probably an interesting one, right? So auto manufacturers allow mobile device access through web portals to start up your car. If you're inside the grocery store and you want to start up your car as you're having your purchases bagged, you can actually go on your mobile device in some of your cars, and that connects through the internet to the auto manufacturer. Auto manufacturer then connects back across the internet to your car, which is connected, or maybe not through the internet, pardon me. They'll actually use other services, over-the-air services, and start your car up for you. Or in healthcare nowadays, there's patients themselves are able to connect to the portal and gain access to their records, their medical records, for example. So you've just gone in for a blood test, and you want to look at your results, and the healthcare provider posts it on some internal network. They give you access to a web portal, and whereby the same sort of mechanism might be used by the doctors themselves. So think about the mobile devices. So a doctor might go up to a bedside patient and want to look at the X-ray that was just taken, 10 minutes ago. So instead of waiting for the film to come down and going to the oldie-timey light boxes and hanging them up and taking a look at them, they come right onto the iPad. And so those iPads are connecting directly to a wireless access point, something like AirWatch, which you're going to hear about in this series of webinars. And that's going to connect back to the private network as well. So there's multiple ways to get there. And this you could probably replace mobile devices with a laptop. So it's not completely different from that perspective. However, mobile devices change the game a little bit, particularly when we talk about bring your own device, because it belongs to the consumer, right? So the corporate entity doesn't have as much control over those things. Plus, the mobile device doesn't have a complex or strong authentication mechanism the same way that, for example, Windows or Mac OS X does on laptops. So the presumption is that if you type in your PIN, 1, 2, 3, 4, you are the user that's authorized to use that device. So it's a much weaker authentication mechanism. So it changes the game in multiple ways here. Plus, it's so much easier to lose a mobile device. We always have them on us. I would not walk around with my laptop and go to a restaurant and, well, actually that's not true. I'm seeing more people do that. But, it's less likely that you'll see somebody with a laptop sitting in a restaurant than you will with them on their mobile device or their iPad. And so there's a lot more chance of them leaving those things behind. And so when we go back to what what's the top 5 concerns is losing data. It's either on the device that's left behind, or it's the ability of the device to be hacked, and for the internet web portal to be the way that the hackers get in, or to be able to break in through the wireless access point if they have the opportunity. And by the way, just by the by, if for the wireless access point, if you're allowing mobile devices, you should probably segment your wireless access not directly to your internal network. So I see a lot of customers who have pure guest access, which doesn't allow any internal access. It lets the guest go to the internet. And then the next layer, the next zone of defense is going to be for their own users' mobile access. Purely, it's authenticated, it connects to their internal authentication mechanism. You can give them access in a limited way and through an extremely monitored way to the internal resources, versus somebody coming in and sitting down at a cubicle and plugging their laptop in, and now they're right on the internal network. So it depends. There's many ways to segment a network nowadays, but it's what I was talking about. The perimeter is dead, but long live the perimeter is plural. So let's talk about a few security intelligence use cases, and I'll go into them in a few here. The first one is detecting suspicious behavior. And so what we might be able to do there is we might look for a baseline activity pattern and then detect when an increase in mobile activity from Android devices has all of a sudden occurred. So, and you can do that as well from multiple locations. So when we think about, for example, our AirWatch, which is a spectacular product, it does a great job of detecting all kinds of bad things. But when you start looking at being deployed across multiple geographies, so you may have different facilities in Ireland, in Yugoslavia, in Austria, in who knows, Latin America somewhere. So they're spread out geographically all over the place. And what you want to be able to do is detect when all of a sudden an Android outbreak, for example, I don't know if it's on Android, but they do have a fairly rich set of malware out there. So if you all of a sudden see a spike in your Android devices connecting to, say, a specific website, and this is occurring randomly, so you get 3 devices in Latin America, a few in Eastern Europe, and a few in Asia Pacific or something like that. In and of themselves, it may not be enough to trigger an alert, but when you combine all of those globally and you detect that they're all coming from Android devices, then that can trigger an alert that says, look, we're starting to see some Android malware. This is the very beginnings of this infection. Let's go investigate it and stop it before it becomes a problem. All right, so that's one of the things you can do. Another interesting suspicious behavior use case is being able to, so let's say you've got some mobile device that, or mobile application that is, that does something with credit cards. Maybe it's some online payment thing, you're a retailer, I'm not sure, but you can set up a rule that says, if I see a query by the database administrator to my credit card tables off hours, that could be a possible SQL injection attack, which is still the #1 way to break in through web applications, right? So effectively what we're saying is, why is a database administrator accessing credit card tables in the first place? Probably ought not to be. And it's more suspicious because they're happening off hours. Granted, there's a lot of computer geeks like me who stay up late and do things, so it could be fine, but it just seems a little suspicious, all of those factors combined into one. Detecting policy violations. So aside from suspicious behavior, you may have specific policies. For example, and again, I talked about being able to segment your mobile device access to a sort of a DMZ, like a trusted DMZ, if you will. So if you all of a sudden see that we're having attempted connections to internal networks from something that's a mobile device, you may want to go investigate that. Who's trying to break in? It could be somebody sitting out in the parking lot with some sort of high-powered antenna hooked up to a mobile device or whatever. Somebody wandering around the halls trying to break in and see whose organization they can break into in this multi-tenant building. Who knows? Data theft or leakage from mobile devices. I'll talk about that in a second, so let's bookmark that for a second. And of course, you want to be able to look at unencrypted voice and text from mobile devices, right? Because one of the things about mobile devices is that they get carried around with them. They might be using the mobile carrier themselves, so you may want to be encrypting the voice that goes across that. And of course, plain text anything is probably not good if you're allowing it to your internal network to begin with. We talked about advanced persistent threats quite a bit as well, and so that's another thing that we want to be able to detect, and I'll talk a little bit about that again. So, that's more anomalous activity, and I'm going to bookmark that once again. And in fact, here's an interesting little use case, or here's a little story, is that the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, detected an advanced persistent threat because they noticed that there was a connection to China, which was slightly suspicious. But then when they went and they profiled the asset, they found that it was an IP-connected thermostat, probably running some sort of embedded Linux or something like that. I don't know for sure. And so that is a highly suspicious activity. And in fact, what I tell a lot of customers is if you're not monitoring your printers, for example, which effectively are just Unix LPR or LPQs in many cases, so then you're not monitoring important things, because what do you send to printers? A lot of classified documents. The CFO does anyway, right? So if the printer in the CFO's office is hacked and you're not monitoring, then there could be all kinds of interesting intellectual property or financial data being exfiltrated to your competitor. Not a good position to be in. So as the Internet of Things becomes more and more fleshed out, you need to monitor more and more things. And of course, detecting fraud. So one of the things might be baselining mobile application transaction volumes, right? So it could be that you allow consumers to do credit checks, and all of a sudden you see more credit checks than normal from a particular IP address or from a particular mobile or from a particular geography. So that can indicate that somebody is trying to find out somebody's credit rating and maybe conduct. There's all kinds of ways that you can use that. And in fact, we have a customer that does a similar thing. They actually support auto dealers, and the auto dealers do credit checks on a regular basis. And what they look for is a particular loan officer or a dealership themselves. They profile how many credit checks they do on a periodic basis, and they look for spikes in that activity to see if somebody is doing something malicious, or even different activity, right? It might not be a security use case in that case. They might actually say, look, you guys, you're not selling as many cars, and we just figured we'd tell you should ramp up your business a little bit, so helping out the small business owner, I guess. And then correlating e-banking PIN changes with large money transfers. What we know about account hijacking is that they don't just go hijack one account and then go transfer money and then move on to the next. It's basically a bulk thing. They hijack a bunch of accounts, and then they change the pins on them quickly, and then they go back and they do money transfers, and sometimes using mules. And so what you'll notice is that within 24 hours they'll do that, right? So what they do is they hijack the account, they change the pins, the owner can't change their pins. They retain the account, then within 24 hours they'll do the transfer. So if you see a pin change followed by a large money transfer within 24 hours, that can be a suspicious activity. That's just one example, but you can use, there are all kinds of analytics that you can apply. So let's talk about a use case for network activity monitoring. So in this case, we're using our Qflow capability. So we can see all the way up to layer 7. We're doing partial packet capture, and we're also detecting the application regardless of port. So what we see here is that there's a rule that fired at the top. So a potential botnet was detected. Okay, well, why? I need to know more information about this. Why do you think that there's a botnet? So we dig in a little bit more, it's a little bit click. We click on the flows up in the top right there. And then we see that the destination port for this activity was port 80. However, because we're doing application detection, what we find is that it's actually Internet Relay Chat, IRC, which is pretty common for botnet communications, for command and control and server communications. So, all right, that's suspicious enough, but let's dig in a little bit. Let's confirm that. So we click on that, and now we actually see the negotiation. So we see for the nickname, the bot says, I am a zombie, and then we see a little bit later on that it joins the botnet command channel. So what you find out is that being able to analyze and view the actual communication is a phenomenal investigative tool. But you can do more than that. You can actually detect data leakage. Now, I wouldn't call this a full DLP solution in that sense, but what we can see here is that that we're looking at an actual network connect or partial packet capture from a network connection. And if you look down here at the bottom left, what you see is, and it's a little bit harder to read, and this might be a little bit of an eye chart on your screen, but if you look closely, what it says is credit %20, card %20 number. So basically, credit card number, because %20 is a space in UTF. And so we also see 12334-4321, 4567. So it looks like a pattern of a credit card. So effectively, what you can do is look for patterns of data that might indicate certain types of data leakage. In this case, it's credit cards. You could do social security numbers. You could do a number of things. In fact, you could also do something if your company is being purchased or you're in the middle of an acquisition. You may look on social, you may pull in social networking data and say, hey, I want to look for my company's name and maybe the acquiring company from anybody in my organization if they're hitting Facebook. Or if you can find all your users' accounts on Twitter, you can also look for the same thing. Because what you don't want is somebody to say, hey, Acme Corp is being bought by XYZ Corp, you know, or I'll be working for XYZ soon, you know, frowny face, whatever it is that people want to post. Or smiley face, right? Could be a great thing. This is also useful in mobile applications, right? So we're worried about data leakage. So you could set up a rule that's not just looking for data, but data that's going to any device that's connecting through your web application portal, so your mobile portal, or through your mobile application or your wireless AP. So you could look for it specifically against those particular targets, so mobile devices that are actually trying to suck down any sort of private data. Because it could be that your policy is that you're not allowing private or sensitive information to leave your organization and go to mobile devices, even through your own, to your own users. But it also could be that somebody's broken in and they're trying to steal data from it. So in any case, really good use case for being able to detect data leakage. Another thing that people have a problem with is actually being able to build up assets, be able to detect or inventory all their mobile assets, or all their assets, period, right? So one of the things that flow data can do is passively build up your entire asset profile. So here's what happens. Every time when you start watching network data, we can see that something is trying to communicate with something else. And whenever we see that, that communication activity happen, we say, oh, this is an asset. Do we already have it in the database? If yes, then obviously we're fine. Is there anything can we enrich the data in there? Is it communicating on a port we haven't seen it communicate on before? And if it's not in the database, then add it to it. So what you can see is what happens is over time you build up an entire asset database. So you've got your IP addresses, you've got MAC addresses if you're pulling from your DHCP logs, if you're doing DNS, if you get you're actually getting, or actually from your DHCP server, you're also getting your DNS names. You can find the last user who was logged onto it, what network it belongs to, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all kinds of interesting things that can come out of your asset database. You can also merge this against your configuration management database, and you can also detect which ones are simply your mobile devices. So if you have a list of mobile devices which are valid and authorized, you can sort by that, and then you can merge it against your list of authorized devices and look at the deltas and find out who else is trying to connect to your environment. And you can also, just sort of as an additional feature, you can enrich the asset database with vulnerability assessment scans. So if you're running any sort of VA scanner like Qualys or whatever, it will add to it. It'll tell you which ports are open, what vulnerabilities exist, and categorized by their CVE. So there's all kinds of things. You can also add names and descriptions and operating systems. So you can add all kinds of things manually as well. So effectively it becomes a really useful tool for managing your assets, managing and monitoring assets. So another feature of being able to use SIEM is the ability to reduce data. And what you can see here is that we're reducing down over 1 million records down to 1. And in fact, that happens on a regular basis. We see that consistently, that 250,000 records are reduced down to 1 or more than that. And what you can do with that is now use this data to create advanced rules. And I'll show you one right here. So one of the rules that might be useful, and again, we're talking about data leakage to a large extent, is that what we see here is, it's not quite mobile, but I'll relate it there in a second. But what we have is we've got a rule that says, look for somebody who does something suspicious to my Oracle database, because that's where I keep a lot of personally identifiable information, and then, or even intellectual property, and then followed subsequently by a large outbound data transfer to an external email provider like Google or Yahoo Mail or any of those. And so what you notice from this particular rule is that it takes events from an Oracle database and it also takes net flows. It combines the two things, and it comes up with something more important. Plus, it also takes in some third-party context information, which is what are the external mail services. So we've got the full gamut of things. And in this case, I always like this example, even though it's not mobile specifically here. But what you see here in the middle is that the person failed authentication twice to the Oracle database. Then they succeeded, and the username they succeeded with is Scott. Anybody who's ever been in Oracle DBA knows that if you install the demo package in Oracle, or at least up until version 10 something, it would create a DBA with username Scott, and the password is, and I'm not going to tell you because that would be giving away information that could be used for evil. But look it up on the internet. It's not a particularly well kept secret. So you can find out the default password, and that's presumably how this person got there. They also, by the way, tried to delete some data while they were there, and they failed. So that was always good. But it's always useful to know why would somebody try to delete that type of data. So we talked a little bit about anomaly detection as well for detecting advanced persistent threats or somebody who's breaking into your network and trying to exfiltrate data. What that means is the ability to automatically, without human intervention, you basically set and forget, you tell the system, go ahead and baseline what data looks like on a regular basis. And then tell me when things change. And you usually do this baseline for about 2 weeks, and that's enough to build up data for the most part, unless you're looking at month-long seasonality, which we'll talk about in a moment. And excuse me, and then it will it'll start, and then you can turn on the actual detection itself, and it will continue to tune itself. So even if things change over time, from the moment when you say, okay, now start telling me when things are going off of baseline, when there's an anomaly detected, it still over time is baselining. It continues to baseline while it's running as well as detect. So it will self-adjust over time. And in fact, it also takes into account seasonality. And what that means is, if you look at this chart, it's basically a daily chart, and this is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, presumably. And what we see is, on a daily basis, it kind of looks the same. You know, our users come in, they start to use the network, different applications, whatever it happens to be. We see that blue thing, which is spiky early in the morning. I have no idea what that is, but it seems normal on a regular basis. And so for the weekend, we see the data tapers off. Maybe that blue thing spikes again, probably some sort of automatic transaction that happens daily, you know, regardless of day of the week. And now it's all of a sudden we saw the green start to spike up on January 15th or 16th for whatever reason, then we would get alerted presumably. So it's really useful for doing things such as, you know, if we're looking for mobile application usage. So we think that our mobile users come into our web application portal and they're accessing our patient portal, or they're accessing email or whatever it is. You can start to profile that and then look for anomalies. So all of a sudden you see your mobile application pattern change. And that can change on a per traffic basis, on a per network basis, on a per server basis. It can also take place on a per user basis. So if you look at what we have here, and again, I'm not sure, there's a lot of the example slides I have here are relevant to Oracle for some reason. Apparently, our example, the people who put these examples together had access to a test Oracle database. But think about if you picture that this being mobile device usage by user, accessing email, accessing a web application portal, whatever, what have you. What we see here is that on the right-hand side of the chart, there's different, each one of these bars represents people. And this one person in green is clearly doing a lot more than everybody else, right? So that looks suspicious in and of itself. And so what we see is that this person named Matthew Felder is doing 3,000 accesses to Oracle, where everybody else is averaging around 6, 3, 2, et cetera, et cetera. So it looks highly suspicious. Don't be wrong, this could be absolutely fine. We could, instead of saying, let's look at overall, let's look at what Matthew Felder does on a regular basis. This guy might drink a lot of coffee. I don't know. Maybe this is his normal application usage. Maybe he goes like Energizer Bunny. I have no idea. And everybody else is lethargic and not doing a whole lot. But you can set up a system to determine that, in fact, and say that's Matthew Felder's normal behavior. So don't worry about it. 3,000 transactions per 15-minute interval, fine. Everybody else is doing 6. But it looks highly suspicious the way that we're doing it now. So we've talked a lot about different types of use cases and the general concepts around security intelligence. But let's talk a little bit about QRadar, our systems itself. So it starts out with a log management capability, and we talked about this briefly, and there's also a SIM package. Log management is simply pulling in logs and the ability to do searches against logs. You can actually do some correlation, but limited fashion, and there's no workflow in the log management itself. But you can upgrade to full-blown SIM with analysis and workflow, et cetera, just by a license key upgrade. So there's no forklift upgrade here. We also have in our portfolio something called a Risk Manager, which does configuration management, and it is a plugin. It's another appliance, but it is a GUI plugin, and it is inherently part of the QRadar system itself. So you can do interesting use cases, such as if I see, so you can say if I see the configuration on a firewall change, so now I'm letting clear text or unencrypted data leave from my personally identifiable information, the server containing PII, then flag me if somebody's changed that rule to allow unencrypted text, because I should only ever allow encrypted text. Same thing for mobile applications. If I see unencrypted mobile data go into my mobile application, then alert me right away. Somebody's changed the configuration on my firewall. Vulnerability Manager is a vulnerability scanner that is built into our QRadar system. It allows you to do historical reporting, compliance reporting, and it leverages the entire infrastructure. So if you've got QRadar collectors all in your environment, so you've got one in Latin America, one in Europe, one in Asia Pac, one in wherever, then you don't want to have to go deploy a separate appliance just for vulnerability scanning. You can actually do the vulnerability scanning from that collection server itself. So you're effectively leveraging your existing infrastructure to gain more visibility and more context and more intelligence. Of course, we also have QFlow Collector, which is our Layer 7 packet capture capability, which I talked about. And we also have vFlow. So vFlow is our virtual collector. So now you can look at network activity in the virtual environment as well. It connects to your virtual switch and it does everything that QFlow does. And then in terms of scale, you can combine all of these things with one head or one management console and dozens of collectors, QFlow collectors, vFlow collectors, our event collectors themselves, and just chain them all together, and you never have to know that there's more than just the console itself. It automatically manages all these, and in fact, when you create a query, it federates them across to all these systems. So it says, I'm looking for IP address 1.2.3.4. It will go federate that to every single one of the collectors. They'll all run in parallel against their own local stores. So as you deploy more and more of these things, it gives you incremental growth capability. There is virtually no penalty for deploying an extra sensor or expanding your deployment. And all of this is built on a single data architecture. It is not cobbled together. It's not bolt-on. And it all runs within the same console. We believe firmly in one console security. You should not have to poke around all over the place to get a sense of what sort of threats you're facing in your environment. You should be able to see it all from one place. And in fact, we also believe that in IBM as a whole. So the way that we look at life is that all of our security products should report up into their security intelligence platform, because that gives you, the more you feed into security intelligence, the more context you have, the more secure you are. And our advanced research feeds all of our solutions, but I think the most powerful is how the solutions themselves integrate. So it's not just, here's a bunch of solutions that are all siloed and don't work together. So for example, if you're running our app scan service and you scan your web application and you find that there is a SQL injection vulnerability, but you don't have time at this moment to correct it, and you can't turn off your web application, the app scan will automatically talk to the IPS, and the IPS will say, okay, I'm going to block access to that particular application if I see what looks like a SQL injection attack. So effectively what you're doing is you're making these things talk to each other, and they make each other smarter as they operate on a regular basis. And the interesting thing is we're constantly trying to think of new ways to make, new use cases to make our systems more integrated and more provide more security to our customers. So that's all I have for the moment, and I would urge you to look at some of these links to get more information. Particularly visiting our website, we've got blog posts at securityintelligence.com. We always have new solutions that are being announced on our announcement page, and you can follow us on Twitter. And Steve Robinson, one of our executives, also has an interesting video out that I would encourage you to look at. So there you have it.